tidbits in the weekly Torah portion. This week, the Torah portion entitled Chayei Sarah has a connection to the events that occurred just a few days ago in Pittsburgh. And I'd like to dedicate this class to the memory of the 11 victims of this horrific crime, this massacre, and also to the recovery from the injuries of the others in this terrible, unprecedented attack against the Jewish people in this country. And I'd like to connect the opening words of the parsha, the opening narrative, which talks about our matriarch Sarah's passing. And our sages tell us that her passing occurred right after the story that we read last week, the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, where God tells Abraham to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. But that was just a test, and Isaac was not sacrificed. However, our sages tell us that Isaac's willingness, he wasn't a child, to be sacrificed, to give his life for the sanctification of God's name, or as it's called in Hebrew, Kiddush Hashem, is considered as if he had given his life. And the merit attached to that willingness to give his life for God still remains with us to this day. The victims of this crime, of this murder, I refuse to use the word tragedy, because tragedy implies an accident, a natural disaster, someone falls off a high place, whatever. Those are tragedies. This is a blatant form of evil as one can get. But rather than just focusing on the evil, we also have to focus on what was really going on. These 11 people were murdered not because of who they were as individuals, because the murderer didn't know any of these people. It wasn't because they were members of that congregation. It wasn't even because they were members of the Pittsburgh Jewish community. It was because they were Jews. And this was an attack against Jews the world over. And they died because they were Jews, and that is also called Kiddush Hashem, dying for the sanctification of God's name, which begs a question. They didn't choose to die. They didn't willingly offer their lives for God. In the past, tragically, thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Jews were given a choice to betray their religion and profess faith in another God, in another religion, or die, and they chose to die. That would be considered sanctification of God's name. They willingly offered their lives. And in this case, these people had no choice in the matter, just like most of the victims of the Holocaust. And yet we say that these are kadoshim, these are holy martyrs. And the question is, how could we ascribe martyrdom to someone who has not chosen to go this path? And just last night I heard a rabbi quote a Hasidic Rebbe, the Pilyatsinsk Rebbe, one of the Jews who died in the Holocaust in Warsaw. And he said something to the effect that Isaac had the will to give his life, but didn't actually give his life. These people didn't have the will, but they actually gave their lives. We have tradition that every Jew, deep down, has the desire to be connected to God and will never sever his connection if that expression that comes from the depths of one's soul is revealed. So the will that Isaac exhibited extends and attaches itself to the actions of every subsequent generation where Jews have died because they were Jews. So that the will of Isaac and And the actual deaths of these people are combined together. They're synthesized into one. And we could say that these people are martyrs. These are the people who died because they were Jews. And we should never forget that. Judaism is not about death. Judaism is not about dying. Yes, there are cases when a Jew is required to give his life rather than converting to another religion, rather than committing a sexual crime, rather than committing murder of an innocent person. You cannot kill someone to save your own life. But those are exceptional cases. Judaism is about v'chai bahem. Do these commandments, it says in Leviticus, and you shall live with them. Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, has two forms. There's a form where we die as Jews, prepared to give our lives. In fact, at the end of Yom Kippur, we recite the Shema, and it's said that before we recite the Shema, we should imagine as if we are put in that position where we have to make the choice, our lives or our faith in one God, and we're prepared to die for our faith in one God. And we die with the word Shema Yisrael on our lips. That is what it means that we're ready to die as Jews. But the reason why we focus on dying as Jews is to give us inspiration to live as Jews. Those 11 sacrifices, you could say, the Kedoshim, the holy martyrs, as I just referred to them as, had to give their lives. We don't know why God chose to allow this. Yes, the murderer, the evil murderer had free choice, but free choice doesn't mean free ability. Not everyone has the ability to do such heinous acts of murder and destruction. God provides people with that opportunity, with that wherewithal. We don't understand why, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later perhaps. But one thing is clear, that once it happened, we have to take the words of King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, V'hachai yitin alibo, the living, the survivors have to take this event to heart, that we have to learn from this event to sanctify God's name through living as Jews with pride, not cowering because of these evil people who are the real cowards, not cowering and hiding our Jewishness, but being proud that we are Jews, wearing our kippah, wearing tzitzis, putting the mezuzah in a conspicuous place outside of our doorposts, and every other expression of our Judaism in private and in public, to show the enemy that we are not going to be deterred, that our Judaism is stronger than the evil, that good will triumph over evil, light over darkness. There are many different reactions to what happened. One reaction is shock. How could this happen in this country? But the shock is also an emotional thing where we just can't digest the magnitude of sorrow, of evil. When Aaron lost his two sons, the Torah records his reaction. Vayidom Aaron. Aaron was silent. At first we are silent. We cannot assess this. We cannot process this. We're so sensitive, and it'll be a very sad day when we no longer feel that way because we have become accustomed. This has become the new normal, God forbid. It's sad that if one person had been murdered, it wouldn't have had the same reaction. Sure, 11 is 11 times worse than 1, but 1 is a terrible tragedy. I use the word tragedy wrongly, but it's a terrible catastrophe, a terrible atrocity to murder one innocent life. But that doesn't seem to get us upset as much as when it's 11. We can never allow ourselves to be inured to pain and suffering. After the shock and the silence comes anger. Anger is not a good trait, but this is a kosher form of anger. This is what we call moral indignation. We can't forgive this murderer because the murderer killed 11 people. Only they could forgive if he asks for forgiveness. We cannot forgive, and we should always harbor this anger initially we have to have this anger, but we have to then move away from the anger to grief, grief at the loss. We can't say, well, this is just a fact of life, let's accept it. No, there's a point where we have to mourn and grieve, but we can't wallow in that grief. And then we start asking questions. Why did he do it? I don't know why people ask that question when they themselves admit it was a senseless act, which means that there's no rhyme or reason. It makes no sense. But then when we ask the question, why does God allow suffering in this world? Good people suffer, evil to exist. The answer to that is we don't have an answer. Until Mashiach comes, we will not understand God's ways. One thing we do know, that evil does exist. It's not a question of, well, it's not, there's no black or white, there's no evil and good in this world, everything is relative. No, it's not relative. This is unmitigated evil, and we have to recognize evil for what it really is. We cannot understand God's ways, but we do have to question God, not because we're doubting God's existence. On the contrary, the fact that we can question God means that we have profound faith in his existence. The atheist cannot question anyone because there's no one accountable to anything, and there's no rhyme or reason for anything. Everything is random. Questioning, why God did you let this happen? A question that has been asked from the beginning of time by Moses, by Job, by Jeremiah, is a sign that we have profound faith in God. It's also an expression of our prayer to God. God, please take away this evil from us. Take us into your embrace, just like a little child who stubs his toe. He or she goes to the mother and wants a kiss, wants an embrace. Our question is not an intellectual question. It's really us asking God, our loving Father, take us into your embrace. Bring an end to pain and suffering. Bring us Mashiach. Bring us the redemption. Those are questions that are not really looking for intellectual answers. Those are emotional expressions. But there are questions that we should be asking. And one of the questions is, what should be our response? How do we respond to this? Well, we respond to evil by doing good. This is the last stand of evil before the coming of Mashiach, before the final redemption. Good and evil have always been intermingled. And as we progress, we do more and more mitzvahs, the good and evil separate. So the good becomes more pronounced, the evil also becomes more lethal, undistilled evil, unmitigated evil, until such time when there'll be a total separation in the Messianic age and evil will dissipate and disappear. But right now, evil is making its last stand, and is therefore so horrific. The Holocaust, the communist regimes of the world who murdered tens of millions of people, ISIS and other forms of murder that come from all parts of the world. And we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that anti-Semitism and evil comes from one corner of the world, from the extreme right. It comes from the extreme right, it comes from the extreme left, and it even comes from the moderates in different forms. And we cannot ever make peace with this evil. We have to know that the way to deal with evil is by countering with more good. Every act of goodness and kindness that we do gets rid of that evil and causes the separation to become complete until evil dissipates. We have to take the darkness, the sadness, and turn it into light and joy. Show the joy that we have in being alive, being Jewish, behaving Jewishly. We also have to recognize that the response to what happened over here, yes, Judaism believes in self-defense, and I'm not going to go into how exactly we are to defend ourselves. We'll leave that to the experts. But part of our self-defense is through mitzvahs. One mitzvah in particular is the mitzvah of mezuzah. When we put a mezuzah on our doorpost, we're told in the Torah that this is a form of protection because it becomes God's house. And God is our guard who guards us wherever we are. So we should strengthen ourselves in our observance of Judaism as a form of protection, especially the mitzvah of mezuzah. The spiritual way of dealing with evil is through good, darkness through light, hatred through love. This was senseless hatred. We counter that, the Rebbe would say, with senseless love. That means love, unconditional. whether or not I like the other Jew, whether I like the other person, that does not detract from our love of that person. We don't shun a person because of our differences. And that's where we lead to the last point. We have to fight the division in society with unity. But what is true unity? True unity is not that we all agree on everything, that we get rid of our own differences. No, we still have differences and we argue stridently in favor of our views. But in spite of our differences, we recognize that there's an essential unity that exists that transcends those differences, and that we not only tolerate the other, as I say on many occasions, that tolerance is something that you use for a colonoscopy or a root canal. You embrace the other person. When we have true unity, true love, true light and goodness, we'll get rid of the evil, the darkness, the hatred, and the division. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos, and that we no longer know of any sorrow. And may the families who lost their loved ones find comfort in the knowledge that the loss of their loved ones has awakened so many Jews to recognize